Good morning and welcome to the Grim. I'm your host, Kristen. On today's episode, we'll be opening the gate and entering Forest Hill Cemetery, located in Boston, Massachusetts. So grab your favorite mug, cozy up, and let's take a dig into history. When you think of Boston, you either think of its historical importance, Salem, or its sporting teams. Most tourists or locals aren't exactly looking into the local graveyards. Yet Boston has some of the most historically significant cemeteries or graveyards in the country. Home to two large garden cemeteries filled with prominent residents that are sadly overlooked. Forest Hills is in the southern part of Boston's Jamaica Plain neighborhood, and it's a little hard to miss. Comprised of 275 acres, with green space, an arboretum, and sculptural garden, its beautiful historic grounds leave visitors in awe. It abuts Boston's Franklin Park on the northeast of the cemetery, the largest park in the city. Forest Hill's location is set among the important jewels of the Greater Boston's Emerald Necklace, the linked collection of parks and green spaces that ring the city. It's important to note that the cemetery is active, where intermittents take place on most days of the year, making it solemn to visit, and to make sure if you do find yourself inside, please be mindful and respectful of other guests. Forest Hill Cemetery does have strict photography guidelines of the gravestones and the cemetery. Popping into the visitor's kiosk inside the main gate and chat with an employee if you have more questions. There isn't a fee for entering, but a recommendation of a donation to the Forest Hills Educational Trust that is appreciated, which is understandable considering the upkeep and beautiful landscaping of the grounds. The 275 acres of Forest Hills was first begun from the purchase of the Severance family farm in 1848. The Severance homestead was owned by the family for many generations, and a small band of Baptist faith met frequently for religious meetings, and in 1840 took steps to form a church. Not much other history can be found of the family farm, so we'll just have to leave it at there. The other acres were purchased by various owners over the years for the cemetery. The main gate at the cemetery's entrance sadly is not the original. As with most rural garden cemeteries at the time, the entrance was constructed to be extremely grand. The original gate was an Egyptian revival constructed in 1848 but replaced in 1865, with a Victorian Gothic entrance designed by Charles Panter. The ornate iron gates, surmounted by decorative iron scrollwork, were framed by two conical spires and a center stone pediment, all toppled with stone crosses. It creates a dramatic transition from the living to the hallowed ground filled with the resting souls beyond the veil. Once inside, it's easy to see why Forest Hill Cemetery was named one of the 1,000 greatest places in Massachusetts. The acreage has gardens filled with beautiful flowers, sculptures, a fountain, waterfall, lanes shaded by large mature trees, and a serene lake in the center. You almost forget you're at a cemetery and not a visitor of a royal garden. It's best to advise to wear your walking shoes and take a map at the entrance if you plan on seeing anyone of importance or certain sculptures. The most famous sculpture within the grounds to mark the grave sites of James and Martin Milmore is the Death and the Sculpture, also known as the Milmore Monument, The Angel of Death and the Young Sculptor by Daniel Chester French. The brothers were Irish immigrants who collaborated on commissions, and the most notable one being the Granite Sphinx in 1873 that resides in Mount Auburn Cemetery in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Daniel Chester French was widely known for his 1874 sculpture, The Minuteman in Concord, Massachusetts, but better known for his 1920 monumental statue of Abraham Lincoln in the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. Martin Milmore designed the Roxbury Soldiers Monument within Forest Hills. The brothers also designed the statue of John Glover on Commonwealth Avenue in 1875, the Soldiers and Sailors Monument for the Boston Common in 1877, and a bust of Senator Charles Sumner, now displayed in the United States Senate. In the will of Martin Milmore's older brother Joseph, He requested the creation of the monument to commemorate the life of his older brother. French decided to depict the artist at work, with the angel of death interrupting his work, with death grabbing the chisel from Martin's hand as he works. Martin Milmore was just 39 years old when he died. Gone too early, he and his brother's memory are breathtakingly remembered by this gorgeous work of art the French designed. Tragic yet beautiful, and one of the top grave sites in the cemetery is the Boy in the Boat. Created by an unknown artist in 1886, it commemorates the grave of Louise Ernest Musset, who died at just 4 years old of nephritis, a kidney inflammation and scarlet fever. His mother, Madame Louise Musset, originally saved every penny she had for her son's education, but instead used it toward a commission for his funeral resculpture. It depicts his playful spirit, with a sculpture carved of white marble, and depicts Louise playing in a boat with a tennis racket in one hand and a shell in the other. Madame Musset's tale is even more tragic, as she worked as a hat maker in Boston, scraping by penniless to her death in the 1930s. She originally was unable to be buried with her son and in a pauper's grave, but according to legend, Boston Mayor James Curley paid for her burial expenses that allowed her to be laid to rest with her late son. Ernest's sculpture is enclosed in a bronze and glass vitrine to protect it, as the marble was believed to be too soft to stand up to the weathering, which leaves it unweathered and perfectly preserved and eye-catching against the gravestone surrounding it. Famous suffragette Lucy Stone is a resident of Forest Hills Cemetery and the first person cremated in New England at the crematory on the grounds. Stone was the first woman to receive a college degree in Massachusetts and infamously kept her maiden name against the tradition of the time. She founded Women's Journal and was widely outspoken about women's rights and against slavery, being called the orator, the morning star, and the heart and soul of women's rights movement. She influenced Susan B. Anthony to become a suffragette and recalled by Elizabeth Cady Stanton to be the first person whom the heart and the American public was deeply stirred on the women question. All three working together for women's rights and helping the passing of the 13th Amendment due to their efforts, speeches, writings, and activist conventions. Stone was a huge historical figure for women that is not remembered as often as she should be, and a worthy stop. Other members of women's history on the grounds include Dr. Marie Shevitska, Surgeon Dr. Susan Dyma, and America's first trained nurse, Linda Richards. They were pioneering activists, professions in medicine for women's health care, and women's professional education. Nobel Peace Prize winner Emily Green Bouch is also a proud resident of Forest Hills. She was an extremely educated woman of her time, born in 1876, and made considerable contribution toward education, women's rights, and attempting to rid the world of war. Bouch put her talents at the disposal of governments, international organizations, and commissions of diverse types. She helped with many projects of the League of Nations, among them disarmament, the internationalization of aviation, drug control, and the participation of the United States in the League. In the 30s, she sought ways and means to help the victims of Nazi persecution. The Nazis caused Bouch to change her strong pacifistic views and defend the fundamental human rights during World War II. She also concentrated on generating ideas for peace, among them characterized by the common denominator of internationalism. She was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1946 and passed away in 1961. Amy Beach, the first woman to have a symphony composed and published in America, is within the grounds. Poet Anne Sexton's gravesite can be found in Forest Hills as well. Her poetry detailed her lengthy battle with bipolar disorder, suicidal tendencies, and the intimate details from her private life, including relationships with her husband and children. Later, it was alleged that she physically and sexually assaulted. Yet prior, she was awarded a Pulitzer Prize for Poetry in 1967 for her book, Live or Die. Sexton went on to study at Boston University alongside poet Sylvia Plath and George Starbuck, becoming friends with Plath, and paid homage to their friendship in the 1963 poem Sylvia's Death. She was also good friends with Maxine Kumin, poet and author, and would both edit each other's work and offer honest criticism. Within 12 years of her writing her first sonnet, she was among the most honored poets in the U.S., being a Pulitzer Prize winner, a Fellow of the Royal Society of Literature, and the first female member of the Harvard chapter of Phi Beta Kappa. Sexton included numerous topics that were regarded as obscene and repulsive, especially for women to talk about publicly at the time. After having lunch with Kumin, she returned home, putting on her mother's old fur coat, removed all her rings, poured herself a glass of vodka, and then locked herself in her garage and started the engine of the car, which ended her life by carbon monoxide poisoning in 1974. Forest Hill Cemetery also finds itself the resting place of self-made millionaires and philanthropists Andrew Carney, George Robert White, and Eben Jordan. Carney assisted in the founding of the First National Bank of Boston and John Hancock Insurance Company, for which he worked as a director. Carney cared for the youth of Boston by founding the St. Vincent's Home for Girls, and he was a benefactor for the House of the Angel Guardian for Homeless Boys. He established Carney Hospital, the first Catholic hospital in New England, in 1863. One of the most beautiful and intriguing sculptures of the garden is of Grace Sherwin Allen. Allen was the daughter of William and Emily Allen, who died just months before her 5th birthday from whooping cough. Immortalized by sculptor Sidney H. Morris, whom depicted the girl in a buttoned dress, boots, and bow-tied hair. In her hand are drooping flowers, the petals of which have begun to fall. The sculpture is encased in glass, thus her nickname, the Girl in the Glass. Visitors strolling the grounds might find themselves taken back upon sighting Grace, as she appears to be standing among the graves, stuck within. Her parents, mourning the loss of their daughter, had this eerily beautiful piece of art created for all of those who knew Grace to visit her. She is one of the most famous sculptures in the cemetery that visitors often seek out when visiting Forest Hill Cemetery. The cemetery was one of the first places the public could view art, as the Boston's Museum of Fine Arts didn't open until 1870, making it a public destination in Boston for those looking to appreciate the art within. An unusual find upon the grounds is the miniature village. Added in 2006, according to its artist, Christopher Frost, each miniature building is a replica of the home of someone buried within the cemetery. He modeled the structures after thousands of potential houses to include a medley of architectural styles. The houses are meant to be just as diverse as the people now buried within the graveyard. Keep an eye out for the tiny concrete model home of Ralph Martin, a wagon driver who perished in Boston's most unusual disaster, the Great Molasses Flood. Part of the creation of art is also the resting bed benches within. Meant to be benches and not graves, it catches visitors' attention quickly into the wonderment of exactly what they represent. Created by Danielle Kirchmar in collaboration with Lisa Osborne, the bed is a place of conception, sleep, sickness, healing, and eventually death. A bed, a place to rest on a daily basis, is a need common to everyone. In response to the environment of Forest Hills, we choose to make benches shaped like Victorian beds to play on various interpretations of the notion of a final resting place. The concrete suggests an eternal nature, the bed a place to sit and to rest. The great American poet E. Cummings, who was also a painter, essayist, author, and playwright, is buried within. Cummings wanted to be a poet from early childhood, and wrote poetry daily from age of 8 to 22, exploring assorted forms. He studied Latin and Greek at Cambridge Latin High School and attended Harvard University. He graduated with a Bachelor of Arts degree, magna cum laude, and was elected to the Phi Beta Kappa Society in 1915. The following year, he received a Master's of Arts degree from the same university. During his studies at Harvard, he developed an interest in modern poetry, which ignored conventional grammar, syntax, and aimed for a dynamic use of language. His first published poems appeared in the 8 Harvard Poets in 1917. During World War I, he worked as an ambulance driver and was imprisoned in an interned camp, which provided the basis for his novel The Enormous Room, published in 1922. F. Scott Fitzgerald was quoted saying, "Of all the work by young men who have sprung up since 1920, one book survives, The Enormous Room, by E. E. Cummings. Those few who cause books to live have not been able to endure the thought of its morality." In 1952, his alma mater, Harvard University, awarded Cummings an honorary seat as a guest professor. In 1962, suffering a stroke, he passed away, being recognized as the second most widely read poet in the United States after Robert Frost. Cummings wrote approximately 2,900 poems. He is often regarded as one of the most important American poets of the 21st century. He is associated with the modernist free-form poetry, and much of his work used idiosyncratic syntax and lowercase spellings for poetic expression. Scattered about are gorgeous Victorian Gothic architectural mausoleums on rolling hills with gravestones between them, giving visitors pause and attempts to look within their gates. Near the entrance is also the Arnold Arboretum. Newer to the cemetery, but meticulously pruned and gardened, its beauty is unmatched. Forest Hills is worth a day's visit to venture the grounds and just take in everything. Yet even then, it doesn't feel like enough time spent inside. Perhaps that's the draw, to lure the living into their final resting places forever, admiring the fine art within the hollow ground. The grave grind for Forest Hills Cemetery was an iced mocha pistachio with cream only from Honeydew Donuts. Please visit the-grim.com for more honorary grinds in the area. For now, we're closing the gate on Forest Hills Cemetery. We hope you enjoyed our dig into history. If you did, subscribe today and join us next time when we open the gate on the Grim.